why did you choose to present the data? And again, I apologize, this is a low-level question, but why did you choose to present the data as a natural frequency data with respect to the confidence intervals and a per thousand, as opposed to, you know, risk, et cetera? In terms
Do you mean as opposed to percentages?
Yeah, in terms of perceiving.
Well, we could have, so this, if I understand the question, we could have said 8.5% fewer as opposed to 85 per thousand. The problem, the one reason at least that we use putting it always per thousand is here you have an estimate of 3 more per thousand. Yeah. If you're putting that in a percentage, it would be 0.3%. A lot of people we find have problems when you get below 1%, people have problems handling that. So rather than say 0.3%, we say 3 more per thousand. And once you've decided to do that, you want to be consistent in how you present the results. So instead of presenting it, we, here's another one where it would be 4 per thousand less to 4 per thousand more. And again, 0.4% are things that people find hard to handle. So once we're going to present it per thousand for now, others, people might like 8.5% here, but once we've decided to present it per thousand, we do that consistently.
Okay, so Gordon, why don't you pose a specific question where I guess in the chat we can get people to respond to, yeah.
We're going to have 2 questions.
Okay.
First question, would you recommend in favor with this picture of the effects of remdesivir, would you recommend in favor or against? So if you go in the chat, how about if you go in the chat, yes means we recommend in favor, no means we recommend against. For some reason, maybe I'll go off this screen. I can't see the chat. You'll have to tell me what happens. Do you see it? Or maybe I have to stop sharing screen.
No, there's basically a plethora of no's.
Okay. Most people would recommend against. Okay.
Yeah, a bunch of no's.
Would it be a strong recommendation which makes you think that everybody would say no, or a weak recommendation, some people would say yes and some people would say no?
Let's get in here.
Yes, I'm seeing some yeses here, but let's see.
So wait a minute. So don't write in yes or no, write in strong or weak.
Okay, lots of weeks.
Right, okay, good, okay, weak recommendation. Now, there is why remdesivir has made a big fuss is it's the first treatment, now we have the steroids, which actually lower mortality, but it was the first treatment to show any clear benefit. 19 versus 16 days before you get better, before you feel better. So you feel better 3 days earlier. Now there are arguments about whether we really should have rated this down to low. For instance, some people believe that even if it was about 1 day shorter, patients would still consider that worthwhile. If we had this as high quality evidence, we really are pretty sure about a 3-day lowering, would anybody switch from against to for? So either write switch or no switch if you believe this was high certainty evidence.
So now we're seeing some switches and some not. So it's,
okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so let me tell you, the National Institutes of Health, who ran this trial, as well as UpToDate, have made strong recommendations in favor of remdesivir. They think that everybody presented with these data would choose remdesivir. BMJ rapid recommend, and they say, and they have called it high quality evidence, even with all these other lows. they've said overall they think it's high quality evidence because they think this outcome is high quality evidence. This summary is from the BMJ rapid recommendations. We cooperate with BMJ to produce these rapid recommendations. We are making a weak recommendation in favor of remdesivir. Maybe we should have made a weak against, but anyway, it's a weak in favor. So here it's illustrating a couple of things. The same evidence can be interpreted differently, and the crucial role of values and preferences. They're saying what UpToDate is saying is we think patients care a lot about 3 days of symptoms getting better. And in fact, we think it's important to them, even if they feel better, even if they reduce it from 19 days to 18 days. So that's a value, and they think it's very important for patients. Everybody would say yes, okay? So that illustrates data can be interpreted differently and the crucial role of values and preferences. Mo, should I stop sharing now?
Yeah, why don't we do that? And then we'll open it up a little bit more for other questions or discussion points. So I'm gonna request that folks who are here come on to video, if you could. Excellent, excellent. And while we're here, Gordon, let me ask you, if I can, just a broader question that underpins, I think, you know, even the validity of all of these guidelines. And obviously, you know, we're making the assumption that the work you've done is, you know, is meticulously done, and you're basing it on, you know, wherever the best available evidence is. But I always go back in the situation that, you know, and I wonder what your perceptions are around the crisis that we've had and some of the safeguards that normally would be in place around publication. You can argue may not be in place. And well, you can certainly argue that the timing of which things have been getting through, things have been getting funded, the rapidity of the urgency of which people have been saying, get trials started, all these things, you have to believe there have been some corners cut in processes. And that may in fact have impacted sort of what we would normally think of, you know, the quality of data.
Looks like we're breaking up a bit.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we broke up for a minute.
Okay.
So,
anyways, but you get the point, right? I mean, like we're in a crisis. Yeah.
I get the point. So in fact, that's right. And there was a particularly dramatic example of that, because somebody reported an observational study of around close to 200,000 patients, as I recall. And they managed to pull the wool over the eyes of both the New England Journal and the Lancet. And within days of the publication, the whole thing was retracted by both journals. So, you know, you have this. For our guidelines, for the BMJ rapid recommendations, we had a choice to make. We say, we're going to put out the recommendations on the basis of a press release, or we're going to wait till we see a publication. We have decided we would wait to see publication. So in fact, for remdesivir, many groups had already made, including UpToDate, had made recommendations on the basis of press release. We were waiting until we saw the publication. And then if we wait to see the publication, then there's a further delay before it's going to come out in the BMJ. So you're absolutely right. And maybe part of the reason that UpToDate is, we think, misguided in what they're doing is that they do things too quickly. So yes, that is a risk. And definitely the big journals have gone wrong in this rush to publish. They don't scrutinize the way they should.
You know, and in fact, I think the Lancet editorial came out and they actually said that, you know, we have made some errors and we should have paused. We were very eager. Basically what Johnny Anutis has been saying for decades, since 2005, when, you know, his paper, you're all aware of, many of you may be aware of, why all published research findings are false, is this provocative statement, highly cited paper in PLOS Medicine, I think, in 2005. But you can see the reality, like they were chasing this you know, the hot topic phenomena, which is rightly so. It is probably the most important issue that was at least on the minds of everyone for the last 12 weeks. But now they're coming back and saying we should have been careful, we should have been slower, we should have been a bit more, we shouldn't have just jumped on things because it felt right that, they didn't want to miss out, it seemed, the way the editorial was framed. And I guess the broader question is, journals have the ability to do things in a day, 2 days. I mean, you've experienced it. We certainly experienced it. You'd submit something on a Sunday and by Friday it's in print or it's out. And you feel good about that. And you're saying, well, why is it taking a year and a half normally then? Like if they can get it done in 5 days, why are we waiting a year and a half? And you go through this process, but then you think there are safeguards in place. And I just wonder about the preprint server, the rapidity of which, journals have been fighting. 447 journals, in 9 weeks publishing stuff on COVID with publication dates, median times 10 days. It seems worrisome. Even though I benefited from it, like I got papers published, and I think you did too. But I feel uncomfortable by how quickly things were getting done.
Well, you're right. We've talked about the problems, and so you want appropriate peer review. You want hesitations about the scrutiny.
Yeah.
We're into a better phase. We're now seeing the large randomized trials conducted by highly credible groups. So I think your point is right. It's been pretty awful that way, but I think fortunately we're into a better phase now, and I would give ourselves credit in the face of all these reports coming out. On April 29th, we said we don't know nothing about nothing. Mm-hmm. And thus our weak recommendations against everything. So if you looked at things with a critical eye, you saw it was all lower, mostly very low quality evidence, despite any hype.
And it seems to me the only thing that, I read, your paper, but broadly, when you just look at the 600 or so, probably more now, active trials on clinicaltrials.gov, probably active trials looking at COVID, 600 at least. It just seems to me that there's everything being thrown at it. Everything is being thrown at COVID and lots of money is being spent. You can argue about in the end of all this, what will come of all this. But it may still end up being non-pharmacological treatment. It may still end up being distancing and primary hand washing and all the other non-pharmacological treatments that may end up being the things that are going to be what we're going to end up using. Who knows? But do you have a sense? And I'll open it up to other people about what do you think there's actually going to be a meaningful treatment, like a really meaningful one that's going to
everything you listed was not treatment. It was prevention.
Prevention, yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Well, so there's different issues. I don't think any of the drugs are if you're talking about prevention, you're right. It isn't going to be the drugs. It's going to be the masks and the distancing and the goggles and so on, okay, and the isolation. Those are the things that are going to be prevention. When it comes to treatment, it's a different story. So you have all the supportive treatment that you get in hospitals of oxygen and fluids and ventilation and so on. That is crucial in the treatment. But we now have the steroids, I think. There's convincing evidence that they lower mortality. That's a big deal. Maybe the remdesivir, maybe eventually it made the point estimate was a third reduction in mortality, but this very wide confidence interval. Maybe when all, and there's still remdesivir trials going on, maybe that's going to lower mortality. Maybe there's going to be something else. I'm not surprised if there's very few of the drugs that are going to be beneficial, very few perhaps, in terms of important benefits. But we got one, and isn't it wonderful? Cheap, easy, we've been using it for 100 years. We've got one thing that really lowers mortality.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I have a thought that speaks to developing guidelines, etc. When there's discord between UpToDate and how their interpretation versus your interpretation, and the press picks up on discord and augments it, and then the public sees that there's discord as an end user, and as someone who's developing guidelines, how do you cut through that discord, especially when it's amped in press or with a clickbait headline, then they augment the fact that the public is losing faith in X, Y, and Z. You know, I'm just curious as to that. When there's potential discord at the development level and gets translated down, how do you make your voice heard over everybody else, I guess?
Well, what you hope is that the way it is presented, will people ask, why are there differences? And I told you with the remdesivir, it's fundamentally a value and preference issue. How much everybody would agree, we don't know about mortality, we don't know about hospitalization. The things that perhaps are more important, we don't know about. So given that it may not have any of those benefits, this small reduction, probably real, but it might be as small as a day in time to get better, how much do people value that? Yeah. And if you put a huge value in that, then maybe it warrants a strong recommendation. If you value it less, maybe a weak recommendation, or even as people here thought against. So responsible journalism doesn't say, oh my God, they all disagree, what are we gonna do? It explains why. And obviously I'm a evidence-based medicine fan, but I took this group through that summary of findings table. At the end, people were able to make their own judgments. Yeah. So what we need, what systematic reviewers and guideline panels need to do, and we love our summary of findings tables. We think it's a good way to summarize. Even if you just read the last column with what we call the plain language summary, if you don't want to wade through the rest, it summarizes the evidence for you. And good guidelines will have these transparent summaries that are hopefully transparent enough that people can look at it as the group here did today and say, okay, what do I think of this? What do I think my patients would say given this evidence?
But I think, Gordon, and please, and anyone else, I mean, I know you're probably just listening carefully and intently to Gordon speak, and no one wants to challenge Gordon, and I'm not saying you should, because you will lose. You will lose. But anyways, but I do want to say that it's worthwhile. Give it a shot. I want to see, I love seeing Brad go after this, but go ahead, Brad, keep going. But anyways, Gordon, so the point that I keep seeing a little bit of is the strategy that people use in politics. And Tim Cofield is this author I came across, and he's out in Alberta, but he talks a lot about why do people believe fake information? And he uses the, quote, fake news argument. And he goes, it's a political strategy, which is, if you just throw something out there, as crazy as it is, and the crazier that it could be, no matter what happens, even if it's disproven immediately, there's a group of people that it will stick and it will stay with them. And I guess some of the challenges, there's a crazy number of conspiracy theories out there around COVID. There's a crazy number of things that are going out there. And then we look at it as, hopefully reasonable people saying, just look at the evidence. But the challenge is most people aren't thinking that way, it seems. And so that's and maybe you're saying that's not the audience you're after, right? And that could be it. But a guideline group is not necessarily is not thinking about that audience. But there's a remarkable number of people. And I think there's not a single one of us that hasn't gotten some email from someone who's, kind of says to you, hey, listen, don't tell anyone this, but do you think 5G is behind this? No, it's not 5G, but people are actually talking like it, but they don't want you to know they're talking about it. So it's sticking.
Fortunately, nobody's suggested to me that 5G is behind it. Anyway.
Okay, well, I don't want to say who said it, but it was Brad.
So I'm always interested. So at this point, I say, I'm an evidence-based guy. So what is, and the first thing when you're an evidence-based guy, somebody asks you something, what exactly is your question, Mohit? What exactly are you asking me?
Oh, you want me to rephrase it?
Yeah, one brief sentence, what is your question?
How do you
Now,
battle?
now
Oh,
you see Moat's pause. This
yeah.
goes back to my last 20 years with Moet. I asked him a question like this. What's your question? What is my question? Let me think. I have to think about it.
At this point, I just wanted to say that this is what Brad's been telling me to say to you, so I'd like to defer to Brad if I could. If I could. But anyways, please, somebody help me. I'm drowning. Help
Yeah,
me.
what do you think Moat's
Somebody.
question was? It
Yeah,
goes
come
on for
Michelle,
about 3
jump in.
minutes.
Question.
Michelle has a question. Thank you.
Yeah, Gord, I was wondering how a panel of experts would determine what patient preferences are, because you're not patients.
Excellent point. So there's a number of strategies. So fortunately, there are more and more studies of patients' values and preferences going on. So an ideal panel will do a systematic review of all the value and preference studies that are available before they start. And we have often done that. Unfortunately, that literature is still relatively sparse, and you may not find too much to help you. And as far as I know, nobody has looked at how much do people value 1 day shorter or 3 days shorter of an illness such as COVID. Okay, so you look for evidence. Sometimes, and we have done this, we've done this for some of our BMJ rapid recommendations, you can get a focus group together. So you get a group of 10 to 20 patients, you get somebody who's good at running qualitative research to sit with these individuals and spend an hour and a half and find out what this group says. The American College of Rheumatology is one guideline organization that does this before every one of their panels. They have one of these focus groups, which is really good. The third thing is that for physicians who practice shared decision-making, who actually ask these questions of their patients, they develop an experience. The most dramatic that I know about this to illustrate this is women who have a prior venous thrombosis have to have anticoagulants in pregnancy. They will put up with if you're a doctor who looks after these patients, you know that the women will all say, I'll put up with the subcutaneous injections of heparin, even though warfarin is so much easier to take, but it has a very small risk of fetal abnormalities. And the women always say, I'll put up with the injections. So clinicians who've had this experience of shared decision-making can contribute. And finally, we put patients on the panel nowadays, they can help us. So there are numerous sources of possible information, often not ideal. Often you're guessing. And that is why the guideline panel should be explicit about its values and preferences, to say, okay, here's what we think patients would feel. If you think your patients would think differently, then this is probably not right for you and your patients.
We have a question from Vijay. Vijay, do you want to raise your point?
Yeah. Good morning. This is I'm Vijay from India. I hope you're able to hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So back here, the government is planning to introduce favipiravir as a drug for a treatment of COVID-19. So in your NMA chart, there wasn't any mention about favipiravir. So I was just curious to know that how much effective it is, and when compared to remdesivir, how much is it as good as that, or it is still does not make much difference when compared to a placebo?
Sorry, what's the drug?
It's favipiravir.
The evidence is not in. It's still low quality evidence. We don't have randomized trials. Your government is doing, governments have done a lousy job. You see Mr. Trump with advertising hydroxychloroquine as the greatest. We now know useless and harmful. And why the Indian government is going after this drug, so far, we have no randomized trials providing any support. And my bet, most of these ones that we have no support for are going to turn out to be useless. So I'm sorry about your Indian government's behavior.
Okay.
Right. Thank you. Gordon, I wonder if you could speak. I'm just keeping track of time here. We've got about another 3 or 4 minutes, but I did want to raise one point, and I know this has been an area of at least discussion among a few people. I know you've been interested in this. Why is it, do you think, that public health policy hasn't gone anywhere near the rigor of, treatment policy around drugs? So for example, all these decisions around.
We got 2 minutes. We've got 2 minutes, Mo. I'm going to answer quickly. Okay.
Do it. Okay.
Okay. Because it's very difficult to conduct randomized trials. There's the first randomized trial that I know of, the COVID. They randomized people to go back to health facilities or not, to go to, working out to health facilities or not, and see what happened. People who went back to the health facilities, no increase in COVID versus not going back to the health facilities. Okay, all right, you can go work out, folks, if you're in a low prevalence situation. But it's tough to do. The randomized trials of these public health things are very difficult to do. So most of the time, we're still stuck with low quality evidence, and we'll always be stuck with low quality evidence. Too bad.
Thank you.
A question, Mo, is it possible?
Yeah, Ernesto, yes, from Spain. Hello.
Yeah, hello. Professor Guyat, specifically in developing countries, poor countries, the fact of convalescent plasma transfer was a great hope because there was no availability for antiviral drugs. Is there any serious study on this issue?
Studies that are.
Is it going to have any value?
There's studies ongoing. My bet is it's not going to have any value, but we won't know till the studies. There's one of the problems now in most of the areas, in many of the areas, like we're running a study in Canada, and the good and the bad news is no more COVID. Its levels are so low, we can't recruit people to the studies. By the time you get the study up, the thing's gone. Now, I don't know. I hope if it were running in Brazil or the United States for that matter, they would have no problems with still lots of patients. I know there are trials ongoing. How many trials and whether they're being done in areas where you still have some COVID, I don't know. But at the moment, it's still a big question mark.
Thank you.
Gordon, we are now about 30 seconds from ending. I want to make sure we do stay on time because I know you like to stay on time, because that's what I'd like to offer you. Do you want to give a final closing statement or so just to kind of encapsulate the discussion today?
Well, what I would say is you need to be skeptical about treatments. That there are some people with value and preferences who will say, if it might help, give it to me. That is a legitimate position as well. But if you really want to know, wait for the randomized trials, and you are in luck. In the next weeks, there's going to be more and more information. 3 weeks ago, we knew about nothing. Now we know minor benefits of remdesivir, but we need more information. The steroids lower mortality. Hydroxychloroquine is useless. And there'll be more such conclusions appearing at a pretty rapid pace over the next weeks.
Superb. I can't thank you enough for taking time. And Linan, thank you also for providing the insights. To all of you who joined us this evening, thanks again. And keep in mind, we've got many more events to come. So keep a track on the site. All right. Take care, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thanks, man.
All right. Take care.
Very much.